Hello and welcome to another Kepler development video, and in this video I'm going to be talking specifically about the Kepler Provenance feature. Now what the Provenance does is it stores metadata about Kepler workflow runs and all the associated metadata that has to do with those runs. At least that's visible to the workflow. So what I mean by that is if you have a script, values within the script are not viewable by the workflows. Only values passed to and from the script are viewable by the workflow and will be recorded within the Provenance database. So moving on, the Kepler does have a default database system that it uses when you install the suite. It supports several, but the only problem with that is Kepler doesn't actually have a graphical interface to communicate with this database. You have to do so via command line, and it's very cumbersome to do so using what's installed with Kepler and where it's actually installed and what you have to use from command line. So what I did instead is I used Postgres SQL. Now this is a very stable and popular open source database system, and the download for it can be found at postgresql.org and under downloads. And there's several installers depending on the variety of Linux you're running or other operating system, whether it be Windows, Mac OS X, etc. So the reason I recommend installing this is this does come with a graphical user interface, and there's a few things that I set up before I actually used it for Provenance, and I'll be covering here. So first I set up a Provenance user with a password, and then created the Provenance database with that user, so that user has all associated permissions. And this is because when Kepler first uses this database, it's going to initialize it by creating this schema, or the default schema. So that's a series of tables. So the user needs to have permission in the database to create tables and etc. And that it can get quite granular when you assign permissions within Postgres SQL, so it's easiest just to make a user that's an owner of the database. Now when we do this in production, there's going to have to be a central database that's set up with users and that have certain rights to write data and such. So that's a whole nother problem in and of itself. So within the GUI we can actually explore the schema and see all the tables that are within the Provenance database, as I've done here, and there is a lot of data that that it will store about workflows. The other useful feature is the ability to write SQL queries in the small editor it has. So I have a query off screen that I'll copy now. And if I can run it using F5, and basically what this small query does is it selects all workflows that happened on a certain day, or that were executed on a certain day. So in here you can see that there was 4 runs of the serial rhesus workflow and also a run of a testing expression workflow, it looks like. So yeah, some Provenance testing I was doing. And here I'm only selecting the start and end times. There's as you might guess, there's a ton of other data that you can dig through or explore, using this. So in my personal, or in what little time I've spent actually using Provenance, this has been a lot easier to explore it using this graphical interface than what was provided otherwise. So and how you actually, so I mentioned that you need to create a user and create a database. So how you actually get the rest of this configured within Kepler is within a workflow you basically find the Provenance actor. Okay, there we go. So you find the Provenance recorder, and once you insert it in the workflow, you configure it, and there's the options that you need to worry about are, of course, the workflow name, the username and password for the database system you'll be using, which this is inherently insecure here, but we'll have to address that later in actual production. So, and it's on the local host. If this was on a remote system, you'd have to put either the DNS name or the IP address, and DNS name is always preferred over the IP address because of if the IP address changes, the DNS name can still bind correctly, assuming it's configured correctly. So then the name of the database, this should be the default name. If you change it, you have to change this field. And then we're also using Postgres SQL instead of the default, which is HSQL. So this is also the default port of Postgres SQL. So when you install it, it will prompt you to either use the default port or pick a different port that the database will be listening on. And that's where you get this number from. Here, but once you have all this configured, that's literally all you do. Now there is a bug with this recording button, at least on my system. When it's recording, it's supposed to be the same pale greenish blue, or not pale, well, greenish blue color as these buttons that I've been pointing at when it's recording. Red means it's not recording. However, I can click this as many times as I want, and it doesn't actually change color. And the testing I've done shows that Provenance is in fact recording. So I'm not exactly sure why this button is bugged the way it is. So, but just be aware of that. So, but other than that, this is how you get your initial testing setup, so you can start exploring the Provenance feature and actually using it and discovering exactly, how useful the current schema is, or if we need to extend it for our personal use within the BioWith project.